The late afternoon sun poured gold over the Whitman farm, casting long shadows across rusted equipment and cracked soil that hadn't seen rain in weeks. Inside the old wooden barn, Claire Whitman knelt beside a broken water pump, her flannel sleeves rolled to the elbow and her fingers blackened with oil. The pump had seized again, just like it had last spring, but this time she wasn't calling for help. She was the help. A pair of stripped bolts refused to budge, so she grabbed a custom wrench she'd fashioned from a tractor part and a fence bracket. It fit perfectly. She had designed it that way last winter. A few sharp twists, a little coaxing with a pry bar, and the rusted housing gave way with a groan. Claire grinned, just slightly, as the repaired mechanism clicked back into place. She reached for a mason jar of water, poured it through the top intake valve, and watched the blades spin smoothly. Outside, a dusty blue pickup rolled up the gravel drive, its muffler coughing like a smoker. Claire wiped her hands on a rag and stepped out into the fading light. Thomas Whitman climbed down from the truck slowly, his movements stiff, deliberate. His boots hit the ground with the tired thud of a man who'd spent the day keeping other people's problems from becoming disasters. "Pump's fixed," Claire said casually, walking beside him as he made his way toward the porch. Thomas gave a slow nod. "You used the pressurizer bypass?" "Modified it with a dual-valve release," she replied, watching him carefully for a reaction. He paused, almost smiled, but didn't quite. Smart. They sat down on the porch bench together. The wood creaked under Thomas's weight. Claire looked at his hands, calloused and stained, same as hers, but older, slower now. He stared out at the fields for a while, saying nothing. It had become his ritual lately. Come home late, eat little, speak less. Whatever he did at Caldwell Dynamics drained more than just his energy. It drained his spirit. Claire disappeared into the house and came back with a sketchbook, flipping to a new page covered in engine diagrams, fluid flow arrows, and notations scrawled in tiny, fast handwriting. "I've been thinking about airflow ratios," she began, pointing to the drawing. "If you reposition the intercooler here, between the turbine outlet and the plenum, you could get a 12 to 15% efficiency boost. Maybe more if you incorporate heat scavenging." Thomas didn't look. He kept his eyes on the horizon. She waited, then nudged the page closer. "Dad, just look." He glanced at it once, then exhaled through his nose. "I thought I told you to be careful with that kind of thinking," he said, quietly but firmly. Claire frowned. "You mean smart thinking?" "I mean dreaming out loud in the wrong direction," he replied. "You keep talking like that and someone's going to notice, and not in a good way. You say that like being noticed is a bad thing." He turned to her, jaw clenched. "Sometimes, Claire, it is." The silence between them stretched. She stared at him, frustrated. He stared ahead, haunted. After a few minutes, he stood and walked into the house without another word. The screen door shut behind him with a sigh. Claire stayed on the porch, arms folded, the sketchbook limp in her hands. It wasn't just that he didn't want her to get her hopes up. It was deeper than that, like he'd buried something heavy and didn't want her to dig too close. Later that evening, she rode with him into town. Thursdays were his late shift at Caldwell Dynamics, and she'd grown used to doing homework or doodling engine blueprints while she waited in the employee lot. He always told her to stay in the truck, lock the doors, keep the lights off. Tonight, though, the curiosity was unbearable. Caldwell Dynamics towered above the empty streetlights, a glass and steel monument to American engineering. Rumors around town said they were developing something big, something to do with energy propulsion, though nobody really knew what. Thomas waved his badge at the front gate, and the security arms lifted with a beep. He parked in the far corner of the lot, like always. "Just an hour tonight," he said. "Try not to fall asleep." Claire nodded. "Sure, Dad." He walked off toward the loading bay entrance. The moment the door closed behind him, she flipped open her sketchbook and stared at the drawing she had shown him earlier. It wasn't just a concept. It was a solution, one she knew worked. She glanced out at the brightly lit building, the glass panels reflecting laboratory lights, motion sensors blinking faintly near each entrance. She didn't plan to move, but something was pulling her. Maybe it was the low hum that echoed faintly through the pavement. Maybe it was the idea that answers to her father's silence lay just past those doors. Maybe it was stubbornness, the same trait she inherited from him, the refusal to sit still while problems went unsolved. Claire tucked the sketchbook into her backpack, zipped up her hoodie, and quietly opened the passenger door. She kept to the shadows, skirting past the rows of cars, her boots landing soft on the asphalt. No one was watching. No alarms went off. She reached the side of the building where her father usually disappeared and found an unmarked side door with a key card reader glowing green. To her surprise, the door clicked open when she pressed the handle. He hadn't locked it behind him. Inside, the hallways were clean and quiet, the kind of sterile hush that hospitals try to achieve, but never quite do. Claire crept past dimly lit corridors, drawn by the distant buzz of machinery. It grew louder as she moved deeper into the heart of the building. She passed a sign labeled "Restricted, Authorized Personnel Only." Her breath caught. Just beyond that door, something was humming, something alive. Claire reached out and pressed her palm flat against the cold steel. And in that moment, she knew. Whatever was behind that door, it was the reason her father had stopped dreaming, and it was exactly where she was meant to be. Claire moved like a shadow through the dim corridors of Caldwell Dynamics, her breath shallow, footsteps light. The deeper she went, the louder that strange mechanical hum became, steady, rhythmic, like a sleeping giant, exhaling in pulses. She passed rows of unmarked doors and angled mirrors, the kind that looked like they belonged in a high-security vault, not a research lab. Finally, she stopped in front of a large, matte gray double door with no window, only a glowing red panel that read, "Prototype Testing, Authorized Access Only." But to her surprise, the panel blinked once and turned green. The magnetic lock released with a faint hiss. It had to be her dad's clearance. He must have forgotten to log out. She hesitated only a second before slipping inside. The room beyond was vast, taller than a barn silo, wider than any classroom she'd ever been in. Cold air rushed past her skin, and the hum became a full-bodied vibration under her boots. In the center of the room sat a hulking machine, sleek, metallic, and gleaming like a mechanical beast just waking up. It was unlike anything Claire had ever seen, but she didn't flinch. She stepped closer. Copper tubing coiled through the chassis like arteries, black carbon housings encased rotating modules. A digital display pulsed overhead, spitting out streams of incomprehensible data. Claire didn't understand all of it, but she understood enough. She squinted at the engine's left side. The torque regulator was mounted backward. She could tell just by the asymmetry of the output housing. And the drive shaft orientation was off by a full 30 degrees, forcing load imbalance toward the intake side. Why would they route the torque through a lateral fed system? That's going to blow the distribution curve, she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. She reached instinctively into her bag, pulling out her sketchbook. Kneeling beside the engine, she flipped to a blank page and began diagramming. Fast, practiced strokes, her pencil whispering across the page. Notes filled the margins. Incorrect gear orientation, cooling inlet misaligned, pressure loop delay equals instability. Behind her, the room began to fill. She didn't notice the footsteps, the polite coughs, or the muted buzz of conversation. Not until the doors clanged open and a voice boomed across the lab floor. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Caldwell Dynamics. What you're about to see represents the future of propulsion systems in military and high-performance applications." Claire froze. Her eyes darted up from her sketchbook. Victor Harlan had entered with a procession of VIPs, investors, defense contractors, and journalists. Their designer coats and high-heeled shoes stood out like paint splatters in the sterile lab. They circled the machine like it was some sacred artifact, listening to Victor's practiced monologue. And standing right beside the prototype, grease-smudged and notebook in hand, was Claire. A dozen eyes snapped toward her. Victor's voice faltered. "Who the hell is that?" Claire stood, flustered. She tried to step away from the engine, but it was too late. People were already snapping photos. One investor whispered, "Is this part of the presentation?" Victor's eyes narrowed. "You there? What are you doing?" Claire's heart pounded. She could have run, should have run, but the words came out of her mouth before she had time to think. Your torque distribution model is backward. The room went silent. Victor blinked. Excuse me? Claire raised her chin. The way you've routed the torque through the secondary manifold, it creates a buildup of mechanical lag. You're going to burn out the stabilizer under load. Laughter rippled through the crowd, nervous, condescending. An executive with silver cufflinks whispered something to the man next to him, who chuckled. Victor didn't smile. Let me get this straight, he said. You're telling me that our team of engineers, graduates from MIT, CALTECH, and CARNEGIEMELLON, got it wrong, and you figured it out. What? While trespassing? Claire swallowed hard but held her ground. I didn't mean to trespass, I just saw it. And I'm not wrong. Victor paused, then turned to the crowd with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Well, folks, it looks like we've discovered a prodigy right here in our own house. The farmer's daughter with a mechanical gift. There were more chuckles, some even polite. He turned back to her, eyes gleaming now. Tell you what, you seem confident, so let's make this interesting. Claire stiffened. You have 7 days, Victor said, voice rising so the entire room could hear. 7 days to improve the performance metrics of this engine. If you can make even a 10% efficiency gain, something my team hasn't managed in 18 months, I'll give you, let's say, a full scholarship, wherever you want to go. MIT, Stanford, take your pick. Claire's eyes widened. Victor leaned forward, the smile sharpening like a knife. But if you fail, you issue a formal apology to every person in this room. You admit you were wrong, that you overstepped, that you don't belong in this conversation. There was a long silence. Everyone waited. Claire glanced at the engine, then back at her sketchbook. She wasn't entirely sure she could fix it, but she was absolutely sure he was wrong. About the torque, about her, about who got to speak in rooms like this. I accept, she said. The room erupted into murmurs. Victor chuckled. Wonderful. You'll have supervised access during off hours. My assistant will draft the terms. He turned back to the group. Shall we move on to the conference room for refreshments? The crowd moved with him like a tide. Only a few lingered behind, casting curious glances at Claire as they passed. She stood there, notebook still in hand, her fingers trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. From the back of the room, a man in a lab coat lingered. Riley Kim. He had said nothing throughout the exchange, but his eyes had never left her. As he followed the others out, he paused just long enough to say, You've got guts, kid. Claire didn't respond. She turned back to the machine, looking at it not with fear, but with resolve. The game was on, and she had 7 days. The wind cut sharp across the empty parking lot as Claire stepped out of the old pickup, pulling her hood tight against the cold. Caldwell Dynamics looked different at night. Colder, quieter, like a sleeping beast made of steel and glass. The rows of windows, so full of motion by day, now glowed in eerie silence. She gripped the worn plastic of her dad's access badge in her pocket, heart pounding. She knew this wasn't what he meant when he said to stay out of trouble. But trouble had already found her, in front of investors, in front of cameras, and in front of Victor Harlan. This wasn't just about fixing a mistake anymore. This was about proving she belonged. Claire approached the side entrance slowly, trying to look like she belonged there. No one stopped her. Security was thinner during the night shift, and her father's badge had higher clearance than most janitors. He'd earned that, even if no one ever acknowledged it. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed above silent corridors. The hum of machines thrummed faintly behind distant walls. Claire navigated the halls with cautious precision, memorizing each turn. When she reached the restricted lab, the badge scanner blinked green. The heavy door slid open. There it was again. The engine. Towering, intricate, intimidating. The overhead LEDs cast it in harsh white light, but to Claire, it looked almost beautiful. Not because it was flawless, but because it was broken, and she could see where. She walked around the perimeter, pulling her notebook from her backpack. Every inch of the machine was mapped in her mind from memory, but seeing it up close with no interruptions was something else. She ran her hand lightly along a series of carbon fiber tubes, her eyes tracing each connection. Her pencil flew across the page, making notations, sketches, calculations. The coolant manifold, supposedly state-of-the-art, was counterintuitively angled to pull heat back into the core loop. That would cause cascading inefficiencies. The torque vector system was so poorly aligned it couldn't have passed a high school robotics competition. She circled it twice in red pencil, and then she saw it. A pair of sensors, one for load pressure, one for thermal feedback, were plugged into the wrong inputs. Not just misplaced, but carefully tucked away in a section that was difficult to inspect without removing multiple access panels. Claire blinked. This wasn't a mistake. This was sabotage. She stepped back, trying to catch her breath. She wasn't supposed to be here. If she reported this, they'd ask how she found it. If she didn't, she'd be letting someone cover up a design built to fail, intentionally. She sat on the cold concrete floor and opened her backpack fully. Inside were the things that had always been more real to her than textbooks: her custom tools, an old torque wrench, a pair of salvaged calipers, and a small roll of farm-grade electrical tape. She pulled out the replacement parts she had tucked away after last harvest season, mostly scavenged from tractors and irrigation rigs. Nothing aerospace-grade, but functional. Over the next 2 hours, she began crafting a plan, not just for a redesign, but for a workaround. A way to demonstrate proof of concept without needing corporate equipment or $1 million budget. On the farm, when things broke, you didn't call an engineer. You fixed them with what you had. She used spare irrigation piping to mock up an alternate airflow path, drew out a rig using recycled compressor parts, built pressure differentials from old dairy regulators, and all of it, every step, she documented in her notebook with meticulous care. Overhead, in the dim control room behind soundproof glass, a figure leaned forward in the shadows. Riley Kim had been watching for almost an hour. He hadn't meant to stay late. He rarely did anymore. But something about the girl had unsettled him earlier that day. Her certainty, her unflinching answer, the way she spoke engineering like it was a second language, not a subject to be studied. He told himself he was just curious. But as he watched her move, measured, focused, entirely at home in the heart of the most advanced lab in Iowa, he knew he was witnessing something rare. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't bluffing. She understood this engine better than half the team who'd worked on it for 2 years. Riley zoomed in on the overhead camera feed. She was drafting a schematic he recognized, theoretical torque dampening. Except, she was doing it with an approach no one on his team had ever proposed. His breath caught slightly. "Who taught you that?" he whispered to no one. Back on the floor, Claire crouched beneath the prototype again. She was making progress, but it was slow. Every adjustment had to be imagined, verified, drawn. She didn't have access to the engine's software diagnostics, nor the sensor data streams. She was working in the dark, with instinct and hand-drawn math as her only guide, and yet, it was coming together. She tightened a bolt on a test bracket she'd made from scrap and stepped back. The setup wouldn't hold up under real load, but for simulation, maybe. Her phone buzzed 11:47 p.m., time to leave. Her dad would be home soon, and if he found out what she'd done, he'd lose it. She packed quickly, leaving only the smallest fingerprint, a smudge of graphite on the floor, and a single page torn from her notebook, taped to the engine base. Just a hint, a whisper to herself that she'd been here, and that she'd be back. Claire slipped out as quietly as she'd entered. Above, Riley remained still, eyes fixed on the note she'd taped to the base of the machine. "Your math is wrong. Here's mine." He leaned back in his chair and exhaled. The farmer's daughter wasn't just bluffing, she was coming. Claire was back at Caldwell the next night before the building even finished emptying out. She timed it precisely 15 minutes after the swing shift clocked out and 30 minutes before janitorial staff made their rounds. She walked with purpose down the hallway, hoodie up, tool bag swinging from her shoulder like it belonged there. The prototype lab door unlocked again with a blink of green. Inside, the engine waited, humming faintly under standby power. Claire pulled her notebook from her backpack and spread out pages on the ground beside her. She had brought a small clamp vise, salvaged tubing, and a section of heat shield she'd scavenged off an old harvester back at the farm. She worked quickly, not yet touching the prototype, but building a mirrored subsystem off to the side, an improvised replica using parts most engineers would laugh at. She didn't hear the control room door slide open. "You know that thing you built last night wouldn't last 15 seconds under thermal load." Claire whipped around. Riley Kim stood in the corner of the room, arms crossed, the control tablet in his hand glowing faint blue. His expression was unreadable. "I was simulating airflow dynamics," Claire said, not backing away. "If the internal bypass loop is off by even a fraction, you lose over 20% efficiency. My rig confirms it." He walked closer, glancing at her makeshift build. "And your pressure calibration? You using tractor regulators?" "Actually," she said, pointing to a retrofitted part, "dairy line valves. They respond better to small volume surges." Riley raised a brow. "You're serious?" Claire didn't blink. "Try me." He knelt beside the setup and started firing off questions like bullets. "Thermal coefficient on those copper lines. 0.38 at base temp, drops below safe range if you don't insulate them manually. What about torsional oscillation if you shorten the belt tensioner? Cut it by a third. You'll get resonance if you don't reinforce the pivot mount, but I accounted for that with cross bracing." Riley studied her face, then her hands, calloused, dirty. Not from a weekend hobbyist kit, but from real work. His expression softened. "You've been doing this a while," Claire shrugged. "Farm life. You either fix things with what you've got, or you wait 6 weeks for a part and lose half a season's yield." He stood, slowly, and glanced toward the overhead security camera. "They're motion triggered, but this lab's footage is archived locally before it's uploaded," he said, reaching into his pocket. "Here." He handed her a slim flash drive and a small plastic access badge with a red stripe across it. "This unlocks the electrical panel closet. There's a locked cabinet inside. You'll find tools and a diagnostic tablet that'll give you real metrics. Don't use the Wi-Fi. It pings the internal network. Keep everything offline." Claire looked up at him. "Why are you helping me?" Riley hesitated. "Because I've been staring at that engine for 2 years, and I've never seen anyone tear it down that fast. Not even my team. And because—" He stopped. "Because the way they've handled this project, it's not right." Claire took the drive and badge, tucking them into her jacket. "Thank you." He turned to leave, then paused. "I don't know how far you're planning to take this, but you should know, this engine, it has a history, a messy one." Claire frowned. "What do you mean?" But Riley was already halfway through the door. "Ask your dad." She didn't sleep. The next morning, over burnt toast and black coffee, Claire laid her notebook on the kitchen table between her and Thomas. The same table where he'd taught her how to solder, how to balance carburetors, how to sketch systems from memory. His eyes met hers and narrowed slightly. "You've been back in there," he said. Claire didn't deny it. "I'm doing what you taught me. I'm solving a problem." Thomas closed the notebook gently and pushed it back toward her. "You don't understand what you're stepping into." "Then explain it." He stared out the window at the gray soybean fields stretching toward the horizon. For a long time, he didn't say a word. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "I used to work for Caldwell, not as a janitor. I was part of the advanced propulsion team. We were building a new kind of hybrid drive system. High efficiency, high output. It was part of something called Project Hailstorm." Claire froze. Thomas continued. "They told us it was for civilian applications, clean energy transport, emergency response vehicles. But that was a lie. It was always a military prototype, meant for drones. Long range, high speed, quiet enough to sneak into contested zones and fast enough to outrun anything." She tried to process. "That engine, this one, they're the same?" "A next-gen version. Updated parts, better funding. But the core design? Same DNA." He looked at her, his face creased with something deeper than worry, something like fear. "I tried to raise questions," he said. "So did another engineer, Elijah Monroe. Smart, brave, too brave." He swallowed. "One day he confronted our project lead about the inconsistencies, the missing logs, the pressure readings that didn't make sense. 3 days later, there was an accident during a field test. Explosion. Elijah didn't survive." Claire's breath hitched. "You think they killed him?" "I think they made it look like a malfunction, and then they buried the whole program." Silence hung between them like storm clouds. Thomas finally said, "They never officially shut the project down. They just reclassified it, changed the names, hid it in plain sight." And now they're building it again, Claire whispered. Only this time, I'm the one they're testing. He nodded slowly. I didn't want this for you, he said. I spent years making sure you had the knowledge, without the burden. But now you're in too deep. Claire's jaw tightened. Then help me. Don't shut me out. Thomas stood and walked toward the barn without answering, but Claire saw his hand linger for a moment on the doorframe, like he was holding the weight of something invisible, something that had never really gone away. And she knew then, ghosts weren't always dead people. Sometimes they were unfinished work. Claire wasn't paranoid by nature. She grew up trusting her tools, trusting her math, trusting the silence of a field before a storm. But the moment she walked into the lab that night and found her notebook slightly out of place, angled wrong, the edge curling like it had been thumbed, something inside her tightened. She flipped through the pages slowly, eyes narrowing. Page 17, the one with the hand-drawn cooling loop redesign, had a faint, greasy smudge at the bottom right corner. She didn't put it there. Page 22, her latest torque correction overlay, had impressions across the margins, as if someone had pressed a phone screen over it. Someone had photographed her work. She checked the cabinet Riley had unlocked for her. Nothing seemed moved. The tools were still arranged how she left them, and the old diagnostic tablet lay tucked beneath its dustcloth. But someone had been in the room. Not a janitor, not Riley. Someone who wanted to see what she was doing without leaving a trace. Claire pulled the notebook tighter against her chest and backed out of the lab slowly, turning off the lights behind her. She didn't run, but her pace quickened with each hallway. She didn't feel alone anymore, and that was worse than actually seeing someone. The next morning, Riley found her pacing behind the tractor shed on her family's farm, sketchbook in hand, eyes red from lack of sleep. "You were right," Claire said before he could speak. "Somebody's watching me." Riley didn't act surprised. He handed her a wrapped bundle the size of a loaf of bread. Inside, nestled in padding, was a component the color of scorched brass, wires frayed at the tips and edges, pitted like it had survived a fire. "What is this?" she asked. "A legacy module," Riley said. "From the first generation of the Hailstorm project. One of the original engineers snuck it out before the shutdown. It was too damaged to reuse, but the architecture is nearly identical to what we've got now." Claire turned it over in her hands. "And this helps me how?" "It has a bypass chip soldered into the backplate. If you mount it into the prototype's core array, you can override the main command lockouts. You'll get access to diagnostics no one else sees." She nodded slowly. "You trust me with this?" Riley gave a small, tired smile. "You've already seen what the rest of us missed." That night, Thomas drove 2 towns over to an address he hadn't written down in 10 years. The road was cracked and unlit, the kind of place people forget on purpose. He pulled up beside a weather-worn trailer with a satellite dish hanging off the side and knocked once, then twice. The man who answered was older, hair gone completely white, but his eyes were sharp. "Thomas Whitman," he said. "Either you're lost or someone's in trouble." "I need what you saved," Thomas said. "From Hailstorm." The man's jaw twitched. "You know what you're asking?" "I do," Thomas replied. He returned a moment later with a dented briefcase. Inside were burnt schematics, corrupted thumb drives, and a stack of printed sensor logs, faded, singed, but legible. "They tried to erase all of it," the man said, "but some ghosts don't go quietly." Claire sat on the floor of the prototype lab at midnight, legs crossed, the legacy module wired into a rig she'd built with Riley's help. The moment she connected the final lead, the overhead panel lit up. A stream of data cascaded across the screen, temperature thresholds, pressure maps, torque simulations. For the first time, the engine was talking back. She ran a simulated ignition cycle. The system hesitated, then clicked. The prototype shuddered. Lights blinked across its surface like it was waking up. Then a low, deep rumble echoed through the room. Claire jumped back, notebook clutched to her chest. The engine idled for 4 seconds, just 4, but it was enough. It had come to life, and someone, somewhere, had to know. Miles away, in a rusted Crown Victoria parked outside the county diner, Detective Elena Rosas tossed a half-empty cup of gas station coffee into the footwell and stepped out into the cool Iowa night. She'd transferred into the regional field office a week ago, not by choice, but the moment she'd seen the hailstorm tag buried in the Caldwell surveillance reports, she'd volunteered. The original case file, the one involving Elijah Monroe's death, had never sat right with her. Equipment failure, they said, an accident. But the forensics had been scrubbed clean too fast, the logs too vague, the fire too efficient. And now, someone was waking up a ghost engine in the same lab where it all went silent. Rosas adjusted her coat, slid her badge into her back pocket, and walked toward the county clerk's office. Caldwell Dynamics had a footprint here, and she planned to follow it. Whatever was happening with that engine, it hadn't died with Elijah Monroe. And someone, some girl if the chatter was true, had just brought it roaring back to life. Claire knew something had changed the moment her father's badge wouldn't scan. The green light that had always blinked like a sleepy nod now glared red and unyielding. She tried again, more slowly this time. Same result. No click, no access. Just rejection. She stood outside the prototype lab door, frozen. Seconds ticked past. Behind her, a janitor's cart creaked around the corner. Claire gave a casual nod and moved away, heart pounding. Back at the loading dock, Riley was already waiting in the shadows behind a stack of crates. "They locked me out," Claire said. He didn't look surprised. "Security's been crawling the East Wing all day. Word is, someone ran a test sequence on the prototype." Claire crossed her arms. That someone was me, and the engine responded. Riley cursed under his breath. Then they know. They stood in silence, the wind stirring dust along the concrete. Finally, Claire said, "We need to get the core components off-site before they confiscate or destroy them." "I can help," Riley said, pulling out a laminated schematic. "There's a service panel in the floor of Lab 2. It's connected to a freight chute that hasn't been used in years, manual override only. We could lower the parts from the inside and retrieve them from the maintenance lot, but we'll need a decoy." Claire smiled grimly. "I've got a tractor shell in our barn that's about the same size." The plan was messy, improvised, and risky, exactly like every great farm repair job Claire had ever done. While Riley distracted the floor supervisor with a false report of coolant leakage in the solar battery lab, Claire slipped into the prototype room one last time. The legacy module was already detached. She worked fast, removing the housing from the secondary core, unbolting the torque converter, and sliding out the prototype's high-efficiency fuel interface. Meanwhile, Thomas backed their old farm truck up to the Northwest Service gate. Inside the truck bed, concealed under a tarp and bales of hay, was an empty shell of an irrigation engine, outdated, rusted, and hollowed to hold the real pieces inside. They transferred everything in under 9 minutes. By morning, Claire's access profile had been flagged and officially revoked. Her father was called in for a routine review and sent home early with a warning. Riley received an internal memo, all R&D movement to be reviewed by a new department overseer, Dr. Gavin Rann. Things were tightening fast. Detective Elena Rosas sat alone at a corner table in the town's only open all-night diner, a cup of coffee cooling in front of her as she stared at her laptop screen. She'd finally accessed the sealed incident reports from Project Hailstorm's original shutdown, and the name that kept appearing in redacted witness lists struck a nerve: Eli Harlan. Not only had he been one of the last engineers to touch the prototype before Elijah Monroe's death, he was also the estranged son of Victor Harlan. Rosas clicked deeper. Eli had disappeared from Caldwell 6 years ago, filed whistleblower protections, then dropped off the grid. No forwarding address, no employment trail. But one record hadn't been fully scrubbed: a land deed for a cabin up in Nolan's Hollow. Off the grid. No internet, no cell tower range. Perfect place to hide. She shut her laptop and stood. Time to take a drive. Claire and Thomas reached Nolan's Hollow by late afternoon, bumping along a narrow dirt road flanked by frozen pines. The cabin was more of a shack, corrugated metal roof, solar panels coated in dust, and an old wind turbine creaking in the wind. Thomas knocked, no answer. Then he added 3 short taps, paused, and knocked twice more. The door opened just a crack. A man peered out, thin, bearded, eyes sharp beneath a mop of graying hair. "Thought I told you never to come here again," he said. Thomas offered a weak smile. "She's got your eyes, you know." Eli stared at Claire for a moment, then opened the door. Inside, Eli's cabin was cluttered with scattered engine parts, dog-eared technical manuals, and a hand-cranked radio humming faint jazz from a Chicago station. Claire stood near the wood-burning stove while Thomas explained what had happened. "She brought the prototype to life," he said. Eli exhaled through his nose, unimpressed. "That thing was never meant to work," Claire frowned. "I don't understand." Eli walked to a dented file cabinet and pulled out a folder wrapped in foil and duct tape. He dropped it on the table. Inside were schematic overlays, email printouts, and test logs with red markings across all successful performance data. "They sabotaged it internally," Eli said. "Every time we got close to a working system, someone at the top signed off on revisions that sent us backward. The failures weren't accidental. They were protocol." "Why?" Claire asked, stunned. "Because Hailstorm was a shell," Eli said. "They needed a money sink, something to justify inflated defense contracts without ever delivering a working product. Every year, they'd throw in another 10 million, report technical setbacks, and cash the check." Thomas leaned back, rubbing his face. "And Elijah?" Claire asked. Eli looked at her for a long time. He found the loop logs, found out the prototype had actually passed a full systems test, 98% efficiency. He confronted the director the day before the field explosion. He pushed a final document toward Claire. It was a memo, unsigned, with one line underlined in red. "Ensure Phase 4 test logs are purged before internal review. Discredit Monroe if necessary." Claire stared at the words until they blurred. They had never been trying to build something real. They were trying to bury it. And now, somehow, she had pulled it back into the light. The abandoned tractor supply depot sat just beyond the edge of town, tucked between two rusted-out grain silos and a stretch of woods no one had cleared in decades. It had once serviced every farm within 20 miles, but when the big ag companies moved in and the highway diverted, it fell into silence. The perfect place to hide something worth millions. Claire stood in the middle of the cracked concrete floor, arms crossed, boots crunching through layers of dust and straw. The gutted prototype engine parts lay scattered around her like bones waiting for resurrection. Around her, Riley sorted tools, Thomas unpacked crates, and a small generator hummed in the corner, kicking power to the work lights they'd strung across the rafters. "Smells like mice and brake fluid," Riley muttered, wiping his hands on a rag. "Just like grad school." Claire smiled faintly but didn't look up. She was too deep into the layout, mentally reconstructing the system. A hybridized engine, built on torque redistribution and quantum feedback compression. It had never been designed to succeed. Now, it had to. "You really quit?" she asked Riley. "Walked out yesterday," he said. "No ceremony, no box of stuff. Just left my badge on Gavin Rand's desk and told him to choke on it." Thomas looked up. "You realize they'll come after you." "Let them," Riley shrugged. "I'd rather be jobless than complicit." Claire admired that. It wasn't easy walking away from a stable paycheck, especially in their world, especially when power like Caldwell Dynamics held grudges and pulled strings that reached far and wide. They worked into the night. It wasn't like putting together a kit. There were no instructions, no part labels, no guarantees. Claire crawled over the frame, bolting in reinforcements. Riley rewired the interface systems. Thomas calibrated the magnetic converters by hand, one fraction of a millimeter at a time. By 1 a.m., the skeleton of the engine stood upright again, crude, unpolished, but alive. Riley adjusted his headlamp and pulled out a diagnostic tablet, checking pulse readouts. His brow furrowed. "We've got an issue," he said. "The stabilizer's pulling voltage like it's under load, but there's no dampener to regulate it. It'll overheat in less than a minute." Claire straightened. "The quantum dampener." Riley nodded. "Gone. Caldwell must have pulled it when they shut down the original test. Without it, we're basically trying to channel lightning through a garden hose." Claire walked a slow circle around the engine. Her brain spun through every workaround she could think of. And then something clicked. "We don't need their dampener," she said. Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Claire, I mean, we can't replicate the military-grade system, but we might not have to. If I can reroute the thermal overflow through a segmented phase change matrix, we could suppress the instability long enough to run a test cycle." Riley blinked. "That's insane." "But doable," Claire said. "Barely." Thomas leaned against a workbench, arms folded. You'll only get one shot with a workaround like that. You overcompensate, and the system collapses. You undercompensate, and it explodes. I know, she said. He stared at her, jaw tight. Then, with a sigh, he reached for his toolbox. We'll need copper tubing and coolant gel, he said, and I've got a heat exchanger from a wrecked combine that might survive long enough to hold. Riley scratched his head. You two are terrifying. Claire was already sketching a revised design in her notebook. Later that night, after Riley had gone outside to check the generator and the wind had died down into a breathless hush, Claire and her father sat on overturned crates near the engine. Thomas held a thermos of coffee in both hands, fingers trembling just slightly. You okay? Claire asked. Thomas didn't answer right away. Then he said, There's something else I haven't told you. Claire tensed. Is it about the engine? It's about why it was designed the way it was, why it couldn't be allowed to succeed. He looked up, eyes dark under the single hanging bulb. It wasn't for trucks or tractors, not even for civilian transport. The original prototype, Hailstorm, it was commissioned under a Department of Defense contract, classified. The goal was to develop propulsion systems for unmanned military drones. Claire's breath caught. Long range, silent, efficient, Thomas continued. It could carry payloads across continents without needing to refuel. That's what the quantum dampener was really for, stealth thrust regulation. You get that system working, and suddenly you've got aircraft that can disappear off the map and strike before radar even registers them. Claire stared at the engine. Suddenly, it looked less like a machine and more like a weapon. Why didn't you walk away then? She asked. I tried. So did Elijah. But we were already neck deep before we saw the full picture. By the time we knew, leaving would have looked like betrayal. Asking questions looked like sabotage. And they made him disappear. Thomas didn't deny it. He just said, I stayed quiet to protect you. To make sure you never had to carry this. Claire was quiet for a long time. But I am carrying it, she said softly. And we're already too far in to turn back now. Thomas nodded slowly. Then we finish it, but we do it on our terms. Claire looked at her notebook again. The new system was dangerous, unstable, maybe even impossible. But for the first time, it wasn't just about proving she could fix something. It was about rewriting what it was for and who it served. The letter came wrapped in a thin, cream-colored envelope with the Caldwell Dynamics seal embossed in gold across the flap. Claire found it wedged beneath the windshield wiper of the farm truck, sitting in the gravel drive like it had fallen from another world. Inside, the handwriting was formal and exact. Miss Whitman, Mr. Harlan requests a private meeting tomorrow at 3 p.m. in his executive suite. Transportation will be provided. Caldwell Administration. Claire stared at the paper for a long time before folding it in half and sliding it into her jacket. She didn't tell Thomas. She didn't tell Riley. She just packed her notebook, changed her shirt, and met the black SUV that pulled up the next afternoon. The top floor of Caldwell headquarters looked nothing like the sterile labs and mechanical basements Claire had seen. Here, everything was glass and brushed steel and designer furniture that looked like it had never once been used. She followed a stone-faced assistant down a hallway, lined with patent plaques and photos of Victor Harlan shaking hands with politicians. When the door opened, Victor was already waiting. He stood behind a massive desk, framed by a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the entire city. Sunlight glinted off his cufflinks. He smiled, smooth and practiced. Miss Whitman, he said. Please, have a seat. Claire didn't move. You wanted to see me. Victor gestured to the chair again. Humor me. Reluctantly, she sat. The chair sank an inch, intentionally lower than his desk. A power move. She kept her back straight anyway. I've been watching your progress, Victor began, and I must say it's impressive. You've accomplished more with salvaged parts and borrowed time than our own engineering teams managed in 3 years. Funny how that works, Claire said. He chuckled softly. Indeed, which is why I wanted to offer you something more appropriate for your talent. He slid a folder across the desk. Claire opened it. Inside was a formal letter of acceptance from MIT's Department of Mechanical Engineering, dated and signed. Attached was a full scholarship agreement, tuition, housing, stipend, everything. Her name was printed in bold at the top. "I don't understand," she said, eyes scanning the page. "You deserve better than this war you've gotten yourself into," Victor said. "Caldwell is willing to sponsor your education, provide summer internships, and ensure that when you graduate, a position in our R&D division will be waiting. No red tape, no barriers." Claire flipped to the final page. That's where she saw it, the NDA, 6 pages long, non-disclosure in perpetuity regarding all work related to the Hailstorm prototype and its derivatives, violations subject to civil and federal penalties. Her stomach turned. "This isn't an offer," she said quietly. "It's a muzzle." Victor leaned forward, his tone still pleasant. "It's a chance, a rare one. You walk out of here with a future most engineers only dream of. You keep your brilliance, your independence, and we bury the past, like smart people do." Claire's hands trembled, but she kept them folded over her lap. "What if I say no?" Victor tilted his head. "Then things get complicated, and people like your father, who still technically works for us, may find themselves in difficult positions." There it was, the threat under the velvet. Claire stood up. "I'll think about it." "Of course," Victor said, standing as well. "But the window closes soon. I suggest you not wait too long." Outside, the sun had dipped low over the city skyline. Claire walked several blocks before she realized she'd crushed the MIT letter in her hand. She ducked into an alley and leaned against a brick wall, the air sharp with the scent of gasoline and spring dust. She wanted it. God, she wanted it. A real shot, a real future. Not just proving she was right, but finally stepping into the kind of world where she could build, invent, belong. But not like this. Not at the cost of silence. Her phone buzzed. It was a number she didn't recognize, but she answered anyway. "This is Claire." "Detective Elena Rosas," came the voice on the line. "I heard you met with Victor Harlan today." Claire froze. "How do you—" "Let's just say you're not the only person Caldwell's been monitoring lately. I've been watching them longer than you think." There was a pause. "Whatever they offered you, I guarantee it came with strings. The DOJ's been circling this company for months now. If you sign that NDA, you won't just be burying the truth. You'll be making yourself collateral damage." "I haven't signed anything," Claire said. "Good," Rosas replied, "because things are about to move fast, and I have a feeling you're the only one left who can actually prove what they're hiding." Claire looked down at the folder in her hand. Her name, her future. Then she dropped it in a trash bin and walked away. The warehouse was unusually quiet that night. Even the hum of the portable generators seemed muted, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Claire stood over the half-finished engine, grease-streaked hands trembling as she turned the same bolt over and over. It had become a nervous habit. One last piece was missing, the quantum dampener. Without it, everything they'd built would stay just short of functional. That's when Eli stepped out of the shadows. "I know where it is." Claire turned, startled, but didn't speak. Riley, crouched nearby, working on a pressure gauge, slowly stood up. Thomas looked up from his notes at the back bench. Eli closed the warehouse door behind him and dropped a folded map on the workbench. They didn't destroy it. Caldwell kept the dampener locked in a vault below sublevel 3, engineering archives. Most people don't even know that level exists. Thomas crossed his arms. "You're sure?" "I built the original housing mount. I know what it looks like. They kept the real one. Probably figured no one would ever get close enough to need it again." Claire stepped forward. "Then we get it." Eli shook his head. "It's not that simple. There's biometric clearance, motion sensors, rotating key cards. If you trip anything—" "We won't," Claire said. "We'll be ghosts." The plan took 2 days to finalize. Riley studied building schematics and timed the janitorial shifts. Claire memorized patrol paths and practiced bypassing electronic locks, using a dummy rig Riley assembled from junked computer parts. Thomas volunteered for the most critical piece, the distraction. They moved fast. At 9:13 p.m., Thomas entered Caldwell HQ through the loading dock wearing his old uniform. He looked the part, calm, tired, invisible. He wheeled a maintenance cart past the security checkpoint without a glance, then made his way toward the boiler room. At 9:17 p.m., he triggered the alarm by jamming a steel wrench into the emergency gas sensor. Within 60 seconds, klaxons blared across the compound. Evacuation protocols lit up every screen, hallway doors disengaged, and just like they'd planned, all security personnel converged on the upper floors. Meanwhile, Claire and Riley were already inside. They moved like shadows through the lower levels, guided by flashlight and Riley's knowledge of the facility's blind spots. Claire wore black gloves and carried a reinforced duffel. Riley handled the keypad, scrambling with quiet expertise, murmuring updates through a cheap radio earpiece. When they reached sub-level 3, it was colder than expected, refrigerated to preserve archived prototypes. The vault door stood like a silent sentry at the far end of the corridor. Claire stepped up to the biometric scanner. "She's not in the system," Riley whispered through the radio. "Try the patch." Claire slid a small biometric override module into the palm scanner. Riley had cooked it up using parts from an old fingerprint reader and the glass off Eli's discarded coffee mug. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the green light blinked, the door unsealed with a hiss. Inside, shelves of decommissioned tech lined the walls, prototype cores, capacitor housings, and rows of disassembled stabilizers. Claire's breath fogged in the cold. She scanned each section quickly, cross-referencing the layout Eli had sketched. There, a matte black case, labeled QAMP-7A, Property of Defense Division. Do not repurpose. Claire opened it. The quantum dampener was smaller than she imagined, no larger than a shoebox. Its surface shimmered faintly with the sheen of thermally treated alloy, like oil on water. It pulsed slightly in her hands, powered down but still humming with dormant energy. "Got it," she whispered into the mic. "Copy that," Riley answered. "Meet you at the southeast exit." They backtracked through the winding service tunnels, bypassing an access panel as red lights strobed in the distance. Claire's hands tightened around the case. They were 2 turns away from the exit when the radio crackled again, static, then Eli's voice. "They know. They're coming." Claire froze. "Eli? Where are you?" But there was no answer, just a brief rustle of wind, then silence. Riley looked at her. She looked back, heart hammering. They picked up speed. Outside, the evacuation alarm had finally cut off. Lights flickered back on. Security protocols shifted back into lockdown mode. Thomas was already waiting in the truck they'd hidden in a nearby construction site, engine idling, eyes scanning the side street. Claire and Riley burst through the back exit just as 2 security guards rounded the corner from the courtyard. One shouted, another reached for a radio. Claire dove into the truck bed with the dampener secured in her arms. Riley slid in beside her. Thomas slammed the accelerator. Gravel flew as they peeled away, headlights off, tires screaming down the side road that twisted behind Caldwell's fence line. They didn't stop until they were 3 towns away, parked behind a feed mill no one had used since 1999. Claire climbed out and finally breathed. They had it, but her victory felt hollow when she replayed Eli's message. "They're coming." Back at the warehouse, Riley tried calling Eli, straight to voicemail. They texted, emailed, nothing. By sunrise, Claire's nerves were fraying. Then her phone buzzed, one voicemail. She played it on speaker. "I hope you got it," Eli said. His voice was quiet, steady. "If I go dark after this, it means I was followed. Don't come looking for me. Finish the work. Make it count. You only get one shot." The message ended with the soft click of a phone set down. No goodbyes, no promises, just a warning. Claire looked at the engine core and gripped the dampener tighter. They weren't building a machine anymore. They were building a line in the sand. The official press release from Caldwell Dynamics landed like a thunderclap. Caldwell to unveil revolutionary energy platform at Iowa Tech Expo. No specifics, no timeline, just carefully worded PR laced with phrases like unprecedented advancement and breakthrough propulsion. But Claire didn't need to read between the lines. She knew exactly what they were doing. "They're going to fake it," Riley said flatly, tossing the press release across the workbench in the warehouse. "They'll use a shell, maybe some LED lights and pre-programmed diagnostics. The real engine never worked, but that won't matter to investors if they put on a convincing enough show." They're trying to beat us to the finish line, Claire said. Claim credit for something we built. Use the platform to cement their narrative before we can expose them. They'll have the press, politicians, military reps. Once that room applauds, it's game over, Riley added grimly. Unless we crash it first, Claire said. Silence fell over the table. Thomas looked up from the schematics. You're talking about hijacking a corporate presentation in front of government officials. I'm talking about telling the truth, she said. They had 4 days, to finish assembling the engine with the newly recovered dampener. 4 days to test it, stabilize the outputs, integrate safety protocols. 4 days to design a transport cradle, reroute the fuel system for public demo safety, and somehow smuggle the entire unit into the Iowa Convention Center without tipping off Caldwell's security detail. And they weren't alone. Detective Elena Rosas met them in a diner just outside town, wearing dark jeans and a windbreaker that barely covered her badge. I've got a contact inside the DOJ, she said. He's been watching Caldwell's military contracts for months. The moment they announce a demo of that engine, I get the green light for an intervention. Claire leaned forward. What does that mean? It means if we can prove that what they're unveiling is based on stolen, sabotaged, or misrepresented tech, we can shut it down live, on stage. But you'll need to show your engine works, and you'll need to do it fast. No pressure, Riley muttered. Rosa slid a flash drive across the table. This has the full list of officials attending the expo. Press passes, media layout, VIP routes. You'll want to use the freight entrance. Security will be tight, but not impossible. Claire took the drive and slipped it into her backpack. We'll be ready. Back at the warehouse, the air smelled like steel and caffeine. Claire and Riley worked side by side, synchronizing the core systems. Thomas rebuilt the final exhaust diverters, using salvaged parts from a combine. They wired in the dampener, tested it, adjusted it, and tested it again. On the second night, the engine roared to life. Not just a stutter, not the brief cough of a prototype gasping for breath, but a clean, continuous hum that filled the space with low, reverberating promise. The walls shook, the lights flickered, and for the first time, Claire saw it, not as a project, but as a weapon of truth. That night, Thomas disappeared for an hour. When he came back, he handed Claire a sealed envelope. Just in case. What is it? She asked. He didn't meet her eyes. Something I hope you never have to read. Claire tucked it away without pressing. By dawn, the truck was loaded. The engine sat secured in a rolling frame designed to look like a Caldwell prototype, just enough camouflage to roll past the loading dock guards without suspicion. Rosas arranged for a forged vendor badge. Riley created a shell company, Midwest Power Integration. Everything was ready, except Claire. She stood outside the truck with her hand resting on the engine crate, watching the sky turn from navy to gray. Thomas joined her. You scared? He asked. She nodded. Terrified. He placed a hand on her shoulder. Then you're probably doing something worth doing. At the Iowa Tech Expo, the convention floor buzzed with noise and fluorescent light. LED walls flashed ads for artificial intelligence breakthroughs and clean energy initiatives. Drones hovered in promotional displays. Booths offered polished promises. Behind it all loomed the Caldwell Pavilion, slick, monolithic, guarded. Claire's team wheeled the disguised engine through the service entrance just as planned. No one questioned them. Riley muttered under his breath, "We're in." Detective Rosas, now in full uniform, moved into place near the main stage. Her badge gave her enough authority to linger without suspicion. She had a radio earpiece linked to DOJ observers waiting outside in a van. At 2:43 p.m., Victor Harlan stepped onto the main stage. Spotlights bathed him in golden light, his suit crisp, his voice confident. The crowd, hundreds of attendees including government officials, military analysts, and media crews, hung on his every word. Today, he said, we present the culmination of a decade's research, a power system that will redefine how this country moves, builds, and defends itself. Behind him, a team of engineers unveiled the faux engine, a polished mock-up, sleek, silent, and utterly non-functional. Claire waited behind the curtain, heart pounding. At 2:48 p.m., Rosa spoke into her mic. Now. Claire and Riley burst onto the stage, pushing the real engine front and center. The room gasped. Victor turned, his jaw tight. What is the meaning of this? This, Claire said, stepping to the mic, is the engine that actually works. Gasps rippled across the crowd. Journalists raised their phones. Live feeds lit up. This is the engine your company tried to destroy. This is the prototype your engineers were never allowed to finish, and this is the proof that the truth has power. She reached down, flipped the ignition. The engine roared to life. Louder, realer, authentic. No light show, no fake hum. Just pure, mechanical perfection. Victor's face drained of color, and somewhere in the front row, Thomas stood, silent and proud, watching his daughter set the truth on fire. The roar echoed through the convention hall like thunder, tearing open the sky. For a moment, no one moved. The air inside the Iowa Tech Expo was no longer filled with polite murmurs or corporate optimism, but with something primal, raw, and unmistakably real. Claire stood beside the engine, fingers resting on the throttle control, her heart pounding in sync with the steady rhythm of combustion. This wasn't simulation. This wasn't theory. This was proof. The crowd stared. Phones were raised. Streams went live. Security guards hesitated mid-step, unsure if they were witnessing a stunt or a scandal. The lights on Caldwell's mock engine flickered in the background, suddenly reduced to an expensive piece of theater beside the growling machine at center stage. Victor Harlan stepped forward, face tight, with forced composure. "Cut the power," he barked toward the tech crew backstage. "No," Claire said calmly. She turned a small dial, and the engine adjusted its tone, smoothing into a balanced hum, every sensor displaying optimal output. "This is what your engineers couldn't accomplish. This is the real breakthrough, and you tried to bury it." Victor's voice rose, tight with desperation. "This young woman is not affiliated with Caldwell Dynamics. This entire display is unauthorized and dangerous. She's tampered with company property." "You mean the engine your company sabotaged?" Detective Elena Rosas stepped forward from the crowd, flashing her badge. "Let's talk about that." The room shifted. A collective hush fell as Rosas mounted the stage. She turned toward the projector and nodded. On cue, Riley, now at the AV control booth, launched a presentation onto the massive LED screen behind them. File names filled the screen: PDF documents, sensor logs, time-stamped emails, internal memos. "This is a federal investigation," Rosas announced. "The files you're seeing were obtained from whistleblower testimony and recovered project archives. They show deliberate sabotage of a government-funded engine program, codenamed Hailstorm, ordered by senior officials at Caldwell Dynamics." Claire stepped back as her father, Thomas, joined her on stage. He didn't speak, just rested a hand on her shoulder. Her eyes never left the crowd. Victor's confidence cracked. "This is a lie. This data was stolen, manipulated." "Mr. Harlan," Rosas interrupted, "I'm placing you under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit fraud, and unlawful use of classified defense technology." She handed the arrest warrant to the nearest federal agent, who stepped forward and took Victor by the arm. "This is outrageous. I built this company," Victor shouted as he was led off stage, cameras following every step. "She's nothing but a farmer's daughter." Claire stepped up to the microphone. "I am a farmer's daughter," she said. Her voice rang clear through the speakers. "I grew up rebuilding tractors with my dad. I learned from salvage, from dirt, from books with pages missing. And that engine," she motioned behind her, "wasn't built in a corporate lab. It was built in a barn, a forgotten warehouse, by people who weren't supposed to be good enough." The room was silent. You could have heard a camera lens click. "They told us it was impossible, that we didn't have the degrees, the titles, the credentials. But innovation doesn't care where you come from. It only cares how hard you're willing to fight for what's right." She paused, looked out at the stunned faces, government representatives, military officials, journalists, engineers, students, and let them sit with the truth. "My name is Claire Whitman," she said, "and this is what happens when you stop underestimating the people you've tried to keep invisible." Applause didn't come right away. It started with a few hands near the front, then more. A ripple turned into a wave, and then the hall erupted, not in polite clapping, but in full-throated applause, Standing ovations, cheers, shouts. Reporters swarmed the front of the stage, cameras flashed, engineers shouted technical questions, investors called out names, but Claire didn't respond. Not yet. She turned to the engine and gently powered it down. The hum faded, but the impact remained, like a lightning bolt still burning into the ground long after the flash was gone. Riley reached her. "You did it." Thomas grinned through tears. "Number you did." Rosa spoke into her radio. "Federal agents are moving in. Get teams to secure Caldwell's files and servers immediately." The room was already changing. Caldwell's booth was being sealed off. Uniformed agents moved swiftly through the back corridors. Reporters broke into side broadcasts. The whole world had just seen the lie fall apart in real time. And at the center of it, a girl who rebuilt the future with her own hands. Claire stepped down from the stage. For the first time in days, her limbs trembled with the knowledge that the fight wasn't over, but the tide had finally turned. She didn't look back. Victor Harlan's mugshot hit national news before Claire even made it back to the warehouse. The image, once the untouchable face of corporate power, now showed a man unshaven, stunned, and utterly undone. The charges stacked against him: conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice, unlawful possession of classified technology, and destruction of federal property. More would come. In the days that followed, federal investigators combed through Caldwell Dynamics' internal servers and project archives. What they found confirmed everything: the falsified test data, the deleted whistleblower complaints, the manipulated government reports. Contracts were revoked, stockholders fled, and the legacy of a man who once ruled from a glass tower was reduced to a cautionary tale. But for Claire, the world was just beginning to open. Offers flooded in: MIT, Caltech, Stanford, full scholarships, corporate internships, defense contracts from companies that suddenly realized how badly they needed a mind like hers. Journalists hounded her front porch, engineering firms sent gift baskets, cable networks asked to film documentaries. There were even movie studios calling Thomas, asking who should play his daughter on screen. But Claire wasn't interested in becoming anyone's poster child. She turned down the contracts. She ignored the sponsorships. And when she finally stepped up to a podium for her first public speech, her voice was steady and unapologetic. "I don't want to build engines for people who already have everything," she said. "I want to build futures for people who've been told they'll never matter." 2 months after the expo, Claire founded Whitman Engineering, a small startup based out of the same rural Iowa warehouse where she'd first rebuilt the Sabotage prototype. Not long after, she announced the creation of the Whitman Initiative, a nonprofit technical school aimed at teaching real-world engineering to young people in farming towns, Rust Belt cities, and forgotten zip codes. Her first act, naming the school's main workshop after Elijah Monroe. When Eli Harlan reappeared, quiet, bearded, and blinking in the sunlight after weeks in federal witness protection, he came not with bitterness, but with blueprints, Elijah's old notes. Engineering concepts lost in suppressed files. He handed them to Claire and simply said, "He would have been proud of you." Claire cried for the first time since it all began. Thomas never said yes when Claire offered him a job at the school. He just showed up one morning with a toolbox in one hand and a thermos in the other. His name wasn't on the letterhead. He didn't want titles, but every student knew where to find him, under the hood of a hybrid plow or scribbling torque calculations on a chalkboard between welds. They called him Mr. T, and sometimes just the guy who knows everything. And Claire? She thrived. By the time the school celebrated its first graduating class, over half the students had job offers from renewable energy firms, electric truck companies, or independent machine shops back in their hometowns. Claire didn't measure success in accolades. She measured it in welding sparks, soil-stained boots, and the way a teenager's eyes lit up when their engine finally turned over. The world had underestimated people like her father, people like Elijah, people like her. Not anymore. When the Smithsonian reached out, Claire almost declined. "I don't think it belongs in a museum," she told their curator over the phone. "It's not history. It's just starting." But they insisted, so she drove the engine, carefully crated and transported on the back of a repurposed farm trailer, all the way to Washington, D.C. herself. She watched as white-gloved staff gently positioned it in the museum's Innovations in American Engineering exhibit, next to satellites, telescopes, and the first model. The display read, "The Whitman Prototype, first successfully rebuilt Hailstorm engine, developed in secret by Claire Whitman, 17-year-old daughter of a soybean farmer." Built by the one they underestimated, Claire didn't take a selfie, didn't give a speech. She stood in silence, her hand resting on the cool steel, and thought about the barn, about the sketchbooks, about the nights when the wind howled through the siding, and her only light came from a lantern wired into a salvaged battery. That's where it had started, and now it would never be invisible again. Years later, a group of high school girls from South Carolina came to visit the Smithsonian. One of them, quiet, with oil under her nails and blueprints in her backpack, stood longest at the engine. Her friend nudged her. "You okay?" She nodded. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" The girl grinned, eyes shining. "About what I want to build next." And somewhere back in Iowa, Claire Whitman, now 23, now an educator, an innovator, and still a farmer's daughter, walked into the Whitman Initiative's shop class with grease on her jeans and a design challenge on the board. Because changing the future isn't about where you come from. It's about never letting anyone tell you where you can't go. Sometimes, the world doesn't need another genius with perfect credentials. Sometimes, it needs a girl with oil under her nails, a farmer's intuition, and the courage to say, "I see what's wrong, and I can fix it." Claire Whitman didn't just build an engine. She built a path where none existed. She turned a barn into a workshop, failure into fuel, and sabotage into something that couldn't be silenced. And in doing so, she reminded us all of something we often forget. Brilliance doesn't belong to boardrooms. It lives in quiet places. It's passed down over kitchen tables, sparked in tool sheds, and scribbled into the margins of dog-eared notebooks. She wasn't supposed to be in that room. She wasn't supposed to raise her voice. She wasn't supposed to win. But she did. Because when truth runs on grit, and the blueprint is built on justice, you don't need permission to change the world. Just determination. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you know, your daughter, your father, your teacher, your own younger self, tell us in the comments. What part of Claire's journey hit you the hardest? What did you take away from her fight, her fire, her refusal to back down? We read every comment, and your words matter here, because this isn't just about storytelling. It's about honoring the people who fight for something real in a world that often rewards the fake. And if this is the kind of story that fills your chest with that quiet, unshakable hope, the kind that says, "Maybe I can too," don't just leave a comment. Hit that subscribe button and join us, because we've got more stories like this one. Stories about underestimated underdogs, unsung heroes, small towns, big dreams, and the people who build a better future with their bare hands. And trust me, some of our best stories haven't even been told yet. So stick around, share this video with someone who needs a reminder that where you're from doesn't define where you're going. And never forget, you don't have to be invited to make an impact. You just have to show up, speak up, and build like you were never meant to be invisible in the first place. We'll see you in the next story. And until then, keep dreaming loud, keep building forward, and never stop proving them wrong. Like this story, if it inspired you, comment your favorite moment or lesson. Subscribe to see what comes next. And don't forget to turn on notifications. We're just getting started. We'll see you in the next one.